Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Matt McCoy. I'm the chairman of the town's 350th anniversary committee. This is part of our lecture series. It was kind of an add-on because Missy brought it up and it was a good fit, and so we're very fortunate to have this evening. Missy knows our speaker much better than I do, so I'm going to ask her to do the introductions. But thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the topic. It's something I don't know much about, but I'm very interested to hear what the speaker has to tell us.
Yes, welcome everyone to our latest installment. Tonight, the program is called Planting Trees Today for a Greener Tomorrow. And I have the pleasure of introducing a friend of mine, a longtime friend, Dr. Charles Yurgalevitch, Ph.D. Charles and I have known each other for quite a few years. It's a University of Rhode Island connection. And Charles did receive his degree, a bachelor's in plant science from URI, and then left the university, left Rhode Island, took a year off. He went to work on a vineyard in Tuscany, and later on went on to graduate school at Rutgers University where he earned his MS and PhD in horticulture. Went to work down in southern Florida and the Florida Department of Agriculture, as well as the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the University of Florida Extension at Homestead. And then in 2003, he returned to New York City and took on the role of director at the New York Botanical Gardens School of Professional Horticulture. Very well-respected program there, and became very active in New York City horticulture. And as of 2002, he stepped aside, retired, but I think as a horticulturist, you're never going to retire. He went on to work on the New York Botanical Garden's launch of the Gardens and Treasures Tour. Actually, he took on a role and launched his own, first Gardens and Treasures Tour of Sicily as a horticultural consultant in New York and Rhode Island. He has worked with the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens and later with Central Park Conservancy. He joined the South Kingstown Land Trust in 2020, and this past May he delivered a talk to their members entitled Arboricultural Oddities, that's a mouthful, an anatomical and evolutionary talk on why some trees grow the way they do. He also led a plant talk at Duval Trail here in South Kingstown, an amazing trail if you haven't been there. But I want to let Chuck get into the topic of how to grow trees with some of the factors that are going on with the environmental changes. So without further ado, Dr. Charles Yurgalevitch.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Missy, for inviting me to come speak to you tonight. Let me start out. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to interrupt me anytime. I'm used to students coming in and interrupting me practically 24/7, even weekends and 1 a.m. in the night. So I welcome that. So tonight I want to talk to you a little bit about planting trees that will survive under harsh conditions. Just like climate extremes are making it more difficult for us with hotter and more humid days, it's also impacting trees, and hopefully they'll make some decisions that will strengthen these trees and allow them to grow for a long period of time in a healthy way. So stepping back a little, I want to talk to you about how I got started with my interest in trees. I was born in Newark, grew up in central New Jersey, and one of our first houses that my parents bought had a giant willow tree in the back. And we, my sisters, my cousins, we just grew up climbing that tree. My grandparents in Newark had a giant fig tree that my grandfather covered every year, and I remember climbing that tree to pick the figs for him. The other set of grandparents in central New Jersey had pear trees and apple trees, and as kids, we climbed the trees, picked the fruit, tossed the fruit at each other, and just later on, I realized that these experiences impacted me. When I was a sophomore in college, my father, the company he worked for, moved to Warwick, Rhode Island, and they bought a house in western Coventry, and I had never seen a pine tree this large. The local kids called it the Hercules tree, and you can see the 3 giant trunks that rose from this tree. It was probably, the main leader was probably nipped off when it was just a young seedling, and these 3 giant trunks, that's my youngest sister. So we climbed that tree, we had a tire swing on that tree. And then later when I moved to Florida, I was saved up and bought a house. And I bought the house, there was 2 reasons. One of the reasons was because it had this giant live oak tree that fortunately was not in the backyard, but it was in the alley where garbage trucks would come and pick up the garbage. And that tree, this is a later picture after I moved, but that tree, I was able to get the city to prune it twice. It provided great shade. Spanish moss, which is Tillandsia, which is a natural plant that grows on live oak trees in the south. It was just a great tree. The other reason I bought the house was for a light fixture. But so tonight I want to talk to you about I've divided this talk into these topics. So talk a little bit about selection, about assessing the site, like finding the right site for the right tree, when to plant. So what's the right timing to plant a tree these days? The actual planting process, and then what kind of care do you give the tree right after planting? And then what kind of care do you give the tree in the years from now so that it does grow into a healthy, strong tree and lives for 50, 60, 100 years? And then the last topic will be plant health care. So I learned that North Kingstown's tree this year is Tilia americana. The common name is linden or basswood. And it's a great tree. It's in the same family as hollyhocks, okra, cotton, rose of Sharon, which you see flowering now very much. It's a Malvaceae family. It's a native. It's a large deciduous tree, so it drops its leaves in the winter, in the fall, late fall. And it can reach a height of 60 to 80 feet, sometimes up to 100 feet, depending on wind conditions. And the width span can be 30 to 60 feet. It's a low maintenance tree. Once the trees get established, it doesn't require much care. Probably the only kind of care later on would be pruning, and pruning to thin the crown. It's very tolerant of air pollution. Not many trees have that characteristic. And fragrant flowers, very fragrant flowers. You'll see on a lot of these slides, which I'll make available to everyone here in the town, they could share. Those links are where I got that source of information. So try to document everything that I'm talking about. Again, this tree, bees love it. It attracts a lot of bees, different insects. A mature tree can produce about 40 pounds of nectar, which is one of the most highly producing trees for nectar that will support bees. And bees can potentially gather like a full ounce of nectar from each flower. So there aren't many trees that do that. Oh. Okay, so the next topic is selection, and you want to get the right tree for the right place, the right plant for the right place. You've probably heard this before. In order to do that, you need to know what are the light requirements for the tree. Does it need full sun or does it need some shade? For example, dogwoods do best where they do get some shade. They're like edge of forest, small trees. What are the soil requirements? Can it tolerate dry soil or wet soil? High pH, low pH. The problem, you don't have a problem with pH here in the natural soils. They're naturally acidic, around 4.5 to 5. And tolerance for pests. So know your site. Is it wet? Does it tend to be wet? Is it in a low area which water may collect and stay for several days? Or is it a dry soil? Pines, you never want to plant pines in a wet soil. They prefer dry over wet. And then the species, we'll get into it. species native versus exotic, and I'll explain the differences between the two. One thing to think about as our summers get longer, our climate gets warmer, is, I don't know if have you heard of growing zones? The USDA's growing zones. So last year they released a revised map which bumped up the growing zones for most of the US. The higher the number, the warmer the climate. So South Florida has a growing zone of about 11, 11A, 11B. Rhode Island, most of Rhode Island used to be 5B, 6A, and now North Kingstown, which is right here in Rhode Island. The green is Rhode Island. North Kingstown is now 6B to 7A. So there are trees that you may want to think of the long term, and I think you're planting so many trees each year for the next, how many years? You have? Okay, great. So something to think about is trees that previously could not be grown here, will they be able to be grown here in the future? If this trend continues where it keeps getting warmer and warmer and warmer, then you may want to think about that. One tree to avoid planting now, it's a native, is sugar maple. Sugar maples cannot tolerate this warmer weather, and eventually they're, in parts of New York State where they are grown now, they'll eventually die out, but that tree species hopefully will be able to move naturally on its own, or people can start planting them in northern New England, northern Maine. So getting back to selection, and you hear a lot about native trees these days, planting natives, go with natives, and natives are great. They increase biodiversity by up to 30%. They can host many insects and birds and mammals. And when you think about caterpillars that will feed on leaves of trees, well, those caterpillars are a source of food for birds. And it just goes up. It's not even, I wouldn't call it a food pyramid, but it's really a food web where all of these things are interconnected, from bacteria, fungi, caterpillars, etc. They support organisms that are higher up than them. The natives, they've evolved in the area over time with the local wildlife. And when you lose native trees, you're also disrupting the natural ecosystem. So removing an oak tree, for example, you're removing a source of food for caterpillars. Caterpillars are fed upon by birds. The birds will go some other place in order to find food. And there's a great book by Doug Tallamy. He's a University of Delaware entomologist on the nature of oaks, and he talks about this, like how important oak trees are in providing food for, by supporting over 500 different organisms. So the other term for trees or plants is exotic, and exotic means that they haven't originated in the area. They've been introduced either intentionally or inadvertently to a new environment. They can disrupt the local environments and pose a threat to native flora and fauna because there aren't the insects haven't evolved with them over time in that area. For example, I planted in Narragansett at my parents' home. I planted ginkgo and metasequoia. These are two trees that previously were extinct. They were rediscovered in China, and now they've been introduced about 100 years ago and spread throughout the Northeast in climates that they can grow. I've never seen a ginkgo leaf that's been chewed on. I've never seen metasequoia needles that have been eaten. So they're great trees. They're highly tolerant of pollution, but they don't support the insects that oak trees would support and the native trees. So something to think about. It's New York City has many. It's it's the second widely most grown tree in New York City after sycamore. And it's super hardy. It tolerates air pollution, and there's no diseases that have impacted here in this country. So exotics, they lack the predators and diseases that would control them naturally. Longevity in wildlife, they may not have the same lifespan as an oak tree would, for example, and they don't support the wildlife. Their water requirements could be more than the native trees require. So it's something else to think about. They could require up to 50% more water. So now just comparing exotic non-invasives. I talked about ginkgo and metasequoia, which is Dawn redwood. Japanese maple is another tree. It's not native to this country, but you see it widely grown, and that's fine. It's a great small tree. It doesn't spread, doesn't shed a lot of seeds that will spread. Cornus cusa, beautiful tree, great tree, beautiful flowers in June. It's not native, and it doesn't support insects and wildlife. Next, native and invasive, Prunus serotina. That's that black cherry. You've probably seen it. It has a characteristic growth of it. It's more or less twisted growth. Branches sometimes hang down. Produces abundant flowers, lots of fruit. You could make, natives used to make jam from the fruit, collect the small seeds. Supports a lot of birds. The birds that I've seen in our black cherries are just feeding on those fruits when they're ripe. And then there's exotic and invasive. So these are ones you definitely want to avoid. Norway maple. It was brought into this country as a street tree that, to provide shade, fast growing, but it also outcompetes our natives. The leaves open up early in the spring, broad canopy, lots of shade, dense shade, and it crowds out the natives. Another one, ailanthus, tree of heaven. Big problem in New York, in urban areas. It can grow through concrete. It grows, you give it the smallest crack in concrete and sidewalk, it will grow. But the fortunate thing is there's now a pest that's coming. It's in Rhode Island already that is starting to feed on this, so we'll get to that later. That's the spotted lanternfly. So there is some good things about these new pests that are coming through. The next thing about selection is the right size. I was in communication with Melissa and the tree warden, and he said that the trees that will be planted, the lindens, will have a caliber of about 2.5 to 3 inches. So that's a good size of tree to start with. If you get, and caliper is just the diameter of the tree at breast height. If you get a tree that's smaller than 2.5 inches, the chances of it surviving are not very good. So the larger the tree, the better the chance of survival for it. Now, selection. Also, you want a tree that has a nice taper, so it's wider at the base than it is growing up. You want a strong central leader right here, a strong central leader. You don't want any cross branches or branches that are touching. Branches that are less than 45-degree angle are not good. They're easier to take care of or to remove when the tree is younger. When the tree gets older, you'll see the problems that it could pose to the safety of that tree. The foliage should be uniform color, green. If you see a branch that's chlorotic, which means it's yellow and you can see in between the veins, that's it's a sign that there's something wrong with that tree. It's deficient in some nutrient. And there should be free of any mechanical damage, especially along the trunk. If you see damage when the tree is young, where a machine could have hit it, it could have been a small branch that was just ripped off, avoid that tree. Chances are that will rot. It won't have the long life that it should have if it was not injured. So this is a saying that people go by, and this is true for a lot of plants. In the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, and then the third year they leap. So it takes a while. The roots need to get established first, and you don't see how the roots are growing underneath, but those roots are growing. And once that root system gets established, then the tree will start to grow. And pine trees can grow, white pine can almost, those candles when they grow, they can grow a couple of feet each year. So you'll be surprised how quickly trees grow. When I first started planting at my parents, I wanted things to grow quicker and watered and fertilized, and now they're growing too quickly. And it's to try to keep them under control so they don't damage anything else or they don't outcompete. The next is site assessment. Is there restricted root space? Will those tree roots have enough space to grow? Is the soil usually wet or usually dry? And think about, is it a low area? If it's a low area, it's possible that it could collect water, and that water may not drain right away, depending on the soil. Soils in Rhode Island, they tend to be more rocky, so I don't think you have to worry about sandy soils unless you're right along the water. It's possible. Digging holes in Coventry, Rhode Island, we were amazed at how it seemed like the rocks were just growing like potatoes every year. They kept pulling up new rocks, new rocks. Are there utility lines above where the tree is planted? Even though the tree may be small, take a look and see, like here, this is a sycamore maple in Narragansett. You see that tree was planted years ago. They didn't think about those utility lines that are above it. And now this Chempos, if there's a windstorm, that tree falls, it's taking those power lines down. And a lot of the electric companies they have programs that are proactive, that they're trimming these trees before storms come, where they may either fall on the road or pull down utility lines. For trees that are planted along roadsides, think about road salt that could be applied in the winter, because trees will suffer from that. If it gets too salty, that upsets the pH, and trees will start to show nutrient deficiencies. Compaction. If the trees if they don't have a mulch ring, people will tend to walk around close to the trees. They'll compact the soil. Machines, etc., will compact the soil, and that's, for the long-term health of the tree, that's not very good. As the tree grows, will it block road signs? Road signs, stop signs. I've seen intersections where stop sign is covered because of a tree. The branches are covering it. And again, think about this year when you're planting the lindens, how tall they will potentially grow. And hopefully they will grow that tall for you. So the best time of year to plant, you want to plant when the soil is still warm. And that would be end of September into October. And as our climate is getting warmer, it could even extend into November. When the soil is a warm enough temperature, like 45 to 50 degrees, the roots will grow. And you want them to grow and start to get established before the winter frosts come. Hopefully, we will get a winter where the ground freezes and have freezing temperatures for an extended time, because that is also killing harmful insects with cold temperatures. So mid to late fall, after the tree goes dormant, but the trees now, they still have their leaves out. So even a month from now, the leaves will still be out. They're photosynthesizing, meaning they're producing food. That food is going down to the roots, and that will help the roots grow and get established. You could also plant trees early spring, late winter. So next step is preparing the hole. And you don't want to dig a hole that just fits the root ball. It has to be wider than the root ball, or the size of the roots in that container, and the same depth as that. So if the root ball is maybe 2 feet high, that hole should be 2 feet and no more. It doesn't have to be deeper, but it should be wider, and they say 2 times to 3 times the diameter of the root. And you can see here where there's a nice wide hole. This will allow the roots to extend horizontally and get established. Most of the feeder roots on trees are within the top 6 inches of the soil. I think 100% of the tree feeder roots are no more than 1 foot deep.
Doc, when you put these trees on the lindens, say bring the top of the ball to grade,
Mm-hmm.
you need to break up the soil under the ball, or is it just fine digging it?
It depends, and I'll show a photo coming up. But if the roots have they filled that pot? If you could see them, if they're starting to circle that container, tease them apart. You want to break them apart, all of it. You want to just tease it apart, even underneath. Break it apart. You could use your fingers, or you could take a knife and make vertical cuts, so that the new roots will grow out and not continue to circle.
Back to what I was referring to, Doc.
Oh.
Say that hole is, the ball is 2 feet, the hole is dug to 2 feet. We're going to have a backhoe with us, but do we need to break up the soil underneath that?
No. It can sit on that, at the bottom of that hole. That's as deep as it goes. You don't have to break that up, because the roots are going to grow horizontally and grow down, but anchor roots will be able to penetrate. You'll see later on, I have some slides where if it can't go through that rock, it's growing around the rock. Yes, you have a question?
I'm an arborist, and I want to say that root balls in pots are a huge problem,
Mm-hmm.
and they're very often, the tree flare is buried in the pot.
Mhm.
You can't just take that soil
Right.
in that pot at face value.
Right.
You often have to dig it out.
If the tree has been in that pot for more than a growing season or several years, that's when it becomes a problem. Because they're still being fed, they're growing, their roots are continuing to grow, but they're encircling the inside.
That's pot bound.
Right,
I'm talking about the tree flare being buried.
right, okay, right. That's another problem too, and it's buried too deep. If you see the tree, it looks like a telephone pole, where you don't see any difference in the width of the tree. It's just straight all the way down. That's too deep. But also, if the mulch is applied too high, and you don't see the flare at the bottom of the tree, that's too much mulch. So there's two things. It's a good point. So planting. So when you plant, look at the tree. There may be some dead branches or broken branches. Those can be removed. That's the only pruning you need to do when you're planting the tree. You don't want to remove the plant from the tree from the container until that hole is ready. And if it is burlapped, you don't want to remove that burlap until it's ready to go into the hole. Keep the roots moist. And you want to loosen the soil around the roots. I would tease those roots apart. See, they're starting to circle. They've been in that pot for a while. It's fine, but just break them up. Open that up. And if you needed to, make a vertical cut every few inches. And at the bottom, tease these roots out also, or just break it up.
What's the best tool for breaking those up?
A sharp knife.
Okay.
If you're making vertical cuts, yes. Otherwise, it depends on the size of the roots. You could just use your fingers. Gloved hands. Okay. So then the next step, once the tree is sitting in the hole, you would backfill the hole with the existing soil. Why do you not want to put good compost in that hole? What happens then? Anyone? If you put really good soil, composted soil in that hole, what happens? The roots are not going to grow out. They're going to stay there because tree roots grow where there's food and water, nutrients and water. And if you fill that hole with good composted soil, manure, those roots are staying there. They won't get established growing horizontally. And you could have a bad storm that comes up, and that tree will easily be knocked over because the roots haven't established and anchored the tree into the ground. So maybe fill the hole half full with soil, water it so that air pockets are filled, and then make sure the tree is straight. If it's not perfectly straight, that's okay, because the tree will straighten itself out over time. If that tree is getting full sun, that tree will eventually grow straight. And then at the end of the hole there, you want to create like a little berm that goes around at the edge of the edge of the hole, not the root ball, edge of the hole. Create a berm. This will help to retain water so that when it is watered, the water doesn't go off. Fill it again, and then gently compact the soil. Remove any tags. Tags that remain on the trees will, if it wire tags, eventually the tree will grow around it, and you won't be able to move the tag later on. So here is just a good illustration showing a tree that's been planted too low, okay, too high. Here the roots, the top part of the root ball is exposed to air. That's not good. And then here is correct. The top of the roots should be even with the soil. Okay, like the woman over there said, you can't see the flare. The flare, you have no flare, no fare to the tree. So the flare is the area at the base of the trunk where the topmost roots are emerging. And the roots need to be in the soil so that they get moisture, nutrients, and as I said, most of the roots are in top 6 inches of the soil. So here this illustration is showing you want to see the root flare. The stakes, and I'll get into that, the 2 stakes generally are good enough. If you're planting a tree in the backyard and that tree is strong and has good taper, you probably don't need to stake it. But in public areas, you want to protect that tree as much as possible. Protect it from traffic, from kids, from people getting too close to the tree until it gets established. The mulch should not touch the trunk. Generally 2 to 3 inches of mulch, not 1 foot of mulch like you'll see in a few photos. And if it is a burlap tree, you could cut the burlap back. It can stay in the hole and it'll decompose. Okay, immediate tree care. So it's immediately after planting. As I said, you want to protect the tree, especially in public areas. Stake the tree. It just allows that tree to get established and not get knocked over in the first year. The stake should be about 1/3 the height of the tree. They should go to the outer edge of the root ball and not within the root ball. You want to remove the stakes after 1 year because you want the tree to move with the wind. That helps the tree establish girth, and you want that for a strong, sturdy tree. And then tree guards. Think about having tree guards. They fit around the trunk of the tree, go into the soil, the top inch of the soil, and extend up to maybe the first branch. This will protect the tree from deer. If you know that there are deer in the area, deer will rub their antlers, they'll eat the tender buds. Trees have actually evolved, oak trees have evolved a way to deter animals from browsing, and that's when you see oak trees with the leaves still on them in the winter, the lower branches. You'll look for that this winter where leaves are still on the lower leaves of oak trees. This oak trees evolved this way to protect themselves from browsers, from deer, because deer don't want to eat dead oak leaves. They want the buds. It's the buds that have the nutrients that are still soft and tender for them to eat. So the tree guards will protect from deer. They'll also protect from mice. Young trees, the bark still isn't that thick. It doesn't have a thick cork, a thick bark, and it's just easy for mice to gnaw at that. I've lost several trees from mice or rabbits just gnawing at the base of the trees and girdles them, the tree dies. Here, this was, went over to my sister and brother-in-law's house, and I could see from a distance that this strap was too tight. And I went over and I said, I have to remove this strap right away. And my brother-in-law wasn't home, but you can see the damage that it was starting to do here after I removed it. And it's fine, the tree will recover, but left for a long time, you'll see, I have some photos later of trees will eventually grow around it, but it's not good for the health of the tree. And that's why the stakes should have like a soft rubber hose that allows the tree, as it increases in girth, to stretch. So the next thing after staking, you want to mulch the tree. And mulching is good. It keeps weeds from growing. It moderates the soil temperature, helps retain moisture in the soil, and reduces the chance of damage from mowers, from weed whackers, etc. And there's 2 types. You can go with organic mulch, which is bark, wood chips, something that decomposes. This is very good for the tree because this will add nutrients slowly over the years. Shredded red cedar is very good. It repels insects, and if you're planting trees against a house foundation, the red cedar is very good. Inorganic, this is a photo I took at the South County Y, their parking lot. You can see it had rock mulch. Rock mulch is, and maybe it was placed on top of a landscape fabric, but these trees were planted when the South County Y was built in 1982. Has that tree grown much at all? It's sad for the tree because that tree never had a chance to grow, and you can see it's starting to die as it is. Plus, you don't see much root flare here, so it was a combination of a double whammy where it was planted too deep and no nutrients over 40 years. The next tree care immediate, again, mulching. 2 to 4 inches, 3 inches. 3 inches is good. It depends on the type of mulch. You want it to be flat like a volcano, not like flat like a pancake, not like a volcano. It shouldn't touch the flare. And again, like the soil, you created a berm at the outer edge of the root ball. Do the same with the mulch. It just helps retain, when it's watered, the water will go down into the soil instead of washing off. And here, this is mulch volcanoes, very common. I'll show you some photos. This is the Stop and Shop parking lot. These trees in Narragansett, I've actually stopped to talk to the workers. I asked to talk to the supervisor, said this isn't good for the long-term health of the tree. Basically, the guy said, you don't know what you're talking about. So, I even went into the Stop and Shop manager in the store and said, I have to tell you, these trees are not good. They're dying because of this, and they're doing their job. They don't care about the trees outside, but it hurts me to see this, and this is my bike on top of a mulch volcano.
I have to tell you, you're the third person that I know of who tried to talk to them.
Really?
Yeah.
They're dying slowly. It's just, and every year they keep adding those mulch volcanoes. It's amazing. So free the flare. Stop it. And this looks like a telephone pole that's into the ground. Again, these trees, they don't have a chance. And what happens is this mulch is practically suffocating the tree roots because oxygen, air cannot get into the roots. Roots don't just need water and nutrients, they also need some oxygen, some air. And this is suffocating the trees. Again, Stop and Shop parking lot. I'm sorry, Stop and Shop, but I need to use you as an example of what not to do. And you can see these are a combination of they're red maples, Bradford pear, another tree that you want to avoid. Don't plant that tree. It just doesn't have a chance. Again, you see these trees have been in there. I don't know when Stop and Shop Park was built, or that parking lot, but maybe 20 years, more than 20 years. They don't have a chance. And every year they beautifully apply the mulch, but it's just too much. So next is watering. Watering's essential. They need it. If you're not getting any rainfall, about 1 inch per week of water. That's why fall is a good time to plant, because the days are shorter, the temperatures are cooler. If you give it enough water for the roots to get established, that is good. And that's my tree gator there. That's not the kind of tree gator I'm talking about, gator in a tree, but these are the tree gators. Melissa said that they were probably going to go with this as a watering technique. A single bag can hold about 15 gallons. You could double the bags too to hold more. And the water slowly infiltrates into the root ball, into the root zone over 5-9 hours. And if it's hot weather after planting, again, we've had some, like yesterday was near 90 degrees. We don't know. September, there could be a period of very hot days. Even into October, hotter than normal, maybe in the 80s and humid. So you may want to be prepared to water those trees if it hasn't rained and if the soil is drying out. So if you plant, I think Matt said about a dozen trees, less than a dozen trees, that's easy to quickly check and see if those trees need more water. Okay, so what are some things, you probably can't read this, but what's wrong with this tree planting? Shout out. 5 things.
It's too deep.
Too deep, right? What else?
The bag is intact.
Bag is intact, right? It wasn't broken up, right? What else?
Looks dead.
Broken branches, right? It has 2 leaders at top. It's one of them should be removed. You only want a single leader, a single dominant shoot. The black plastic is still on. You can't see that, but the ropes are left around the tree. It's going to constrict the tree. The tag is still on. Hole should, yes, definitely, very good. Hole should be wider. The stake is not properly installed. So here the next one is how to do it correctly. So you can see light pruning. There's a single leader. The tree's protected. The stake is properly applied. It's not too tight around the tree. Organic mulch is applied. The mulch is not touching the flare. The ball, the root, the hole is wider than the width of the root ball. The burlap, this tree was balled and burlap. The burlap has been removed. And only the existing soil was put back into the hole. Putting the existing soil back in allows the roots to grow out into the soil, as opposed to filling it up with good composted soil. The roots would stay there. So fall is a good time to plant. I kind of summarized this already. As long as the temperatures are that 40 to 45, the roots will grow. The soil's still warm, and the leaves are still photosynthesizing, sending food down to the roots. So after the tree is established, this is what is called the regular maintenance, the regular care of the tree. After 1 year, the stakes should be removed. If you keep those stakes on too long, the tree won't establish the girth that it needs when the wind is blowing, the trees are swaying. This is actually good for the tree to strengthen itself. Mulch should be added every 2 years. The mulch doesn't really, if it's a wood-based mulch, it doesn't decompose that quickly. One kind of wood mulch to avoid is pallets, mulch made from pallets, because those pallets are frequently treated with arsenic as a preservative, and there are companies that are shredding that up and selling that as wood mulch, and that's a mulch to avoid.
What's the market of that? So I know.
It would be on the tag. It would be on the bag, I mean.
That they're chewing.
Right. It's recycled mulch. Watering, at least an inch of water after it's been established, but if there's mulch, again, it depends on a lot of the climate conditions at that time. And also start to scout for pests. Really the pests to worry about, I'll get to in the last section, are some of these invasives that are moving up from Pennsylvania, and that have been introduced from Asia. So pruning. Pruning is probably the most important thing that a tree needs after being planted. You prune a tree to develop strong structure and a desirable form. And when you prune when the tree is young, then it needs less corrective pruning later when the tree is mature. So the first rule of pruning is the 3 Ds, dead, dying, diseased branches at planting. Any branches that are crossed or touching, because if they're crossed or touching, as they increase in width, they're going to continue to cross and touch. And I've seen even some trees will actually meld together. If there are trees, any branches with a narrow angle where they're growing like this, then one of those branches should be reduced so that they don't become codominant, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. Branches that come out from the tree trunk at a lower level, those you can leave for a few years because those add girth to the tree, which helps strengthen the tree and helps it stabilize. When they should be removed when they're no larger than maybe 2 inches. You don't have to remove lower branches right away. It also good pruning reduces the risk of the tree failure, improves the stability of the trees. So here, there's pruning before pruning and after pruning. So you have three branches that are the same size, right? 1, 2, 3 here. You want one dominant leader. So here, you can't see it too well, but there's dotted lines here. So this branch was cut back to here. You see this here. This branch here was cut back to here. So you have one dominant leader, which is very good for the tree. These branches here were removed for here. So you want to cut stems that compete. These are reduction cuts. It's reducing the competition between these 3 branches here, which will probably be the most important pruning that can be done on this tree at this time. So once the tree is established and becomes mature, there's 4 methods of pruning trees: crowd cleaning, crowd thinning, crown raising, crown reduction. Here you can see an example of a tree before. And then crowd cleaning would be the 3 Ds, the dead, dying, diseased. Then there's crowd thinning to reduce the density. In Florida, we would teach arborists to thin out the tree canopy because when hurricanes come, if that tree canopy hasn't been reduced, it's like an umbrella, and it just takes that tree right over and topples it over. If you thin it out, then the air can flow through it, and the chances of it surviving strong winds are better. Crown raising, this is when you're removing the lower branches on the tree that I said a few minutes ago, can be left, but it depends on where that area is. Is this in an area next to a sidewalk where those branches may be interfering with people who are walking by, or just invite people to come and pull that branch and break it? And then crown reduction. So this is reducing the size of the tree depending on where the location is. So the biggest things in pruning are thinning, and reduction is also called tipping. And those two things are very important, thin and tip. And this can be applied to shrubs also. So pruning maintains and improves vigor. These are branches. Ideally, you want to remove the branches when they're 2 inches or less, because the tree will form a seal quicker, or as fast as potential bacteria or fungi can enter and start to decay that wood. Smaller cuts are more quickly covered with wound wood or callus wood. So here you can see this here is starting to callus, and this will close this wound here. So people, we heal, trees seal. They close that wound with callus. And here you can see another pruning cut was made. It's a good cut, but it's fairly large, and it's possible that that will be exposed to fungi, bacteria will get in. So proper pruning cuts. Here we can see it's they remove the branch at the bark ridge. Here it's left intact, and this will eventually seal. So you can see this is like a donut, where this was pruned years ago, but that tree properly closed and sealed and protects itself from inside from pests and invasion. Okay. Flush cuts are not good. So flush cut means if a branch is coming out of the trunk and you just go even from top to bottom so that it's flush with the trunk, that's not very good. It's not good at all, because that won't be able to seal. Flush cuts are bad. And here you can see this was a cut too close. It was cut at an angle, and you can see the fungus that has started to penetrate this cut. Okay, the tree's trying to seal. It's forming this callus, trying to seal, but it's already, the rot has entered, and the tree. Trees are amazingly resilient and tough, and trees can tolerate with a lot and even have a rotten interior, but if you don't know that, it could pose potential risk later on. So while it may be bad for the tree, it's good for this little frog. It's good habitat for the frog there. So another reason we want to remove, if there's 2 dominant leaders, what happens as the tree gets older is that it forms what's called bark inclusions, and that's this here. These trees, both parts, are continuing to increase in size, increase in width, and as they do that, eventually one is going to fail. One is going to, in a windstorm, it'll just fall over and break, and then the tree will have to be removed. So it is possible to reduce this codominant, and as the arborist hopefully will agree, but you can prune this branch, for example, higher up, cut that back, because that will allow this side to grow better and stronger, and this will become the dominant trunk of the tree. So you don't want to see this on trees. These are Norway maples on Sprague Park in Narragansett. By removing or weakening one of the dominant leaders, that will allow the tree to hopefully not fail later on. So the next part is plant health care, keeping trees healthy. And there's 2 types of pests. There's biotic, which are living, insects, diseases. Lindens, as I said, they don't have, there aren't many insects or insect problems that they have. They're very hardy. They're native. They've adapted to this climate. They have minor problems with insects, maybe anthracnose, which is a fungal disease, maybe wilt, but nothing that will kill the tree. But other pests, in this age of global economy, commerce around the world, it's just happens these pests aren't introduced intentionally, but they come in airlines and pallets. And this is emerald ash borer, which is wiping out ash trees in the Northeast. This came from Asia. This is a spotted lanternfly. This was first discovered in Pennsylvania. And the funny thing is, it's a slow-moving moth, but when you get close to stepping on it, it quickly jumps away. Lots of them in Central Park. They were concerned that when they were discovered in Pennsylvania, these moths would attach themselves, lay eggs on cars, and cars heading to the Northeast they were transported up in this area. And now it's in Rhode Island, from what I've read. It's more of a problem on fruit trees, grapes. And now the latest problem I heard that is here in Rhode Island has been a problem in New York State are these jumping worms. Their problem when they get into natural areas because they're eating the leaves, the fallen leaves and pine needles that are naturally in the forest. And has anyone seen any of these pests here? Yes. Which ones have you seen?
I've seen the jumping worms.
Have you?
At the Rhode Island Wild Plant Society, our seed starters group had to destroy most of our
Wow.
plants for everybody, so.
That's the one held at URI? Wow. Mm-hmm. Scary. Anyone else? No? Yes.
Yeah, I found them around an oak base with hen of the woods, and I just picked the hen of the woods, and all of a sudden,
Really? I've never seen them, but they do jump like...
you know what, how you see them.
Okay. Okay.
Really do jump.
Yeah. So it's just, we keep the trees healthy. The best defense is keeping them healthy is the best we could do. Mhm. Okay, and then there's abiotic problems, nutrient deficiencies. Here again, sorry Stop and Shop, but this is...
I'm glad they're not a sponsor of the 350.
But again, look at this tree wound. You know, this just doesn't have a chance. Plus the volcano. It was probably damaged when it was installed. There's weed whacker damage, which you don't want to avoid. Compaction. Okay, the mulch is great because it's keeping the soil from being compacted, but it's not properly applied. And then human activities, kids playing, bikes tied up against trees. It happens. So tree wounds, again, a wound like this, it won't seal. And that's a great entry point for fungus, bacteria, insects, frogs. So here are just a few trees. They are resilient. This is New York City, around Central Park, I believe, but very little open area. You see asphalt, you see concrete, and yet that tree roots are continuing. These trees look great. These are red oaks, very hardy, and this is just swallowing up this tree guard. I mean, it's not just the roots that are growing up and swallowing the tree guard, but the trunk of the tree, eventually, if left, will just pop that tree guard. Trees are tough. This is another tree from New York City in the Bronx. This is a Gladitsia honey locust. And you do have honey locusts here, but you're not planting this kind. This is the native. And you see these thorns here. These thorns, if somebody fell into that tree, those thorns would pierce them. And these are at breast level. It goes right down to the trunk. Again, they're adaptable. As I said before, you leave that sign on the tree, it's just getting swallowed up by the tree. Trees don't, they keep growing. They're looking for water, they're looking for nutrients. Here, tree roots are growing in between cobblestones. And trees can be messy. These are fruits that trees produced when eons ago, 13,000 years ago, these fruits were used for food for mastodons, giant elephants. The tree doesn't know that those animals are now extinct, and it keeps producing the same fruits, hoping that some animal will pick them up and disperse them, but alas, they don't know. So some trees can be messy. I've been asked by people, what trees aren't messy? What kind of tree can I plant that doesn't make a mess? And basically, like we shed, we're always shedding our skin, trees shed too. They shed leaves, they shed fruit, they shed flowers, but there are degrees of messiness. These are messy trees. If you want to, yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, I grew up in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And in the neighborhood I was in, we had ginkgos
Mhm.
and both of the...
Right. Ginkgos, Ginkgos there's male trees and female trees. And when they're propagated, you don't know whether they're going to be male or female. So New York City has a lot of trees where there's female fruits. And those female fruits, like these, evolved to have animals eat them and disperse them. It smells like, I like the smell, it smells like a sharp provolone cheese. And actually, it is the same chemical that's in Parmesan cheese, is the same chemical that's in ginkgo fruits. So it's Asians will come to the New York Botanical Garden and collect the fruits, clean them, and they roast them as nuts. So yeah, if you plant ginkgo, the only way to know that it's a male tree would either to graft it to rootstock, or there's a DNA test which is not cheap. So in summary, it's keeping trees healthy for today will provide many benefits for tomorrow. Trees are very good in combating climate change, which we're all aware of, providing oxygen. They take in carbon dioxide, they give off oxygen. They cool city streets and cities, they prevent soil erosion, they provide food for animals, food for people, and this link has, this great link has 22 benefits of trees with explanations for each of them, so check that out later. And then additional information, I'm going to, these are references that I use. I also have an extra copy of Ed Gilman's pruning guide. I'll leave for the arborist here. He's a great guide. I worked with him when I was at University of Florida Extension, and he's excellent. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Sassafras, a great tree also. Native, small tree, fragrant leaves, beautiful tree. One of my favorites. Also, I'd like to mention, Melissa talked about trips to Sicily. I have a trip coming up next month. It was sold out, but 2 people had to drop out. One has a health issue. 2 spots available. We're just doing Eastern Sicily, 10-day tour. And then next spring, we have a 10-day tour of all of Sicily. This will be my 5th or 6th group tour. And I've taken 2 couples on private tours also around the island. So if anyone's interested, let me know. Happy to have you. So thank you. Questions? Yes.
Doc, considering the changes that are in our environment, going forward, what are the current and more importantly the future threats to our trees around town?
Besides the insect pests, diseases. You know, there's new diseases that are moving up from the south that aren't, our winters are not cold enough to kill the insects, the pathogens anymore that are in diseases. Woolly adelgid was kept under control by freezing temperatures in the winter, and that's has wiped out most of the hemlocks. There still are some stands of hemlocks that I've seen in South Kingstown. It's the extremes. The trees can't evolve fast enough to keep up with these changes. And that's why the trees may die out. What trees could be grown here may not be able to survive the hot temperatures that are coming, but they may be able to move further north. Okay? It's like the example of vineyards. You know, parts of France are almost getting too hot to grow grapes and have vineyards, and now they're able to produce wine in England because the climate has gotten warmer. So we have to learn to adapt as much as the plants. We have to help the plants. We have to be stewards of these plants to help them because they can't evolve fast enough to keep up with this, unfortunately. Yes.
Considering the changing climate that you were referring to, and the fact that we're getting better conditions for growing what used to be typical of, say, mid-Atlantic states,
Right.
do you have some favorite amenity trees that you think we should be thinking about that we didn't think about 20 years ago?
Yes, I was telling, I think Melissa, crepe myrtle. It's a small tree, beautiful tree. There's many different kinds. That would be a great tree. I've seen it years ago. I would see it in Westerly along Route 1, but now it's able to survive our winters more. Another one that live oak, Quercus virginiana, is the typical of the southern plantations, the South Florida. It's the oaks that have the tillandsia, the Spanish moss growing on it. They're now growing varieties of it that came from Virginia that are now growing in Brooklyn. So as we keep getting warmer and warmer, this tree may be able to survive like parts of Westerly, even maybe along in North Kingstown along the water. You know, it may be worth looking for those trees that are coming out of Virginia, or I could provide you the contact with one of the graduates is director of horticulture at Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. And they've been growing live oak trees there for about 5 years, and they're growing great. Yes.
I found very interesting what you mentioned about the insects, depending on certain types of trees. Since I lived 4 years in Japan, when I came to Rhode Island, the next thing I planted was a Yoshino cherry.
Okay.
And it stood beautifully.
Right.
But the thing is, are there any insects that would like a Japanese cherry that you know of?
Not that I know of. I've grown it. I don't remember any insect problems with it. It's not a long-lived tree, and it frequently gets a disease that results in like gum coming out of the trunk. And as they get older, you'll see that that's what it starts to decline from.
Yeah. Well, so far, it's been 10 years there. It's been fine.
Right.
And the thing is, of course, in Washington, D.C., you've got these.
Right.
They're great.
Yeah. But I think there's a problem with those trees too. I think they have been suffering.
Chop, they go down. Old stone or something.
Okay.
Do trees have a specific lifespan? You know, so like if you plant a linden, is it predictable how long it will last?
Trees, it depends on location, but if a healthy tree can survive like a linden over 100 years. There are some oaks that are over 200 years. The New York Botanical Garden, when it was built they built a museum building, the main building, if you've ever been there, in 1902 or 3, there was a tulip tree off to the side. And that tree, at that time, they say was 50 to 75 years old. It's still alive. From that tree, they took seeds and they planted out. They had a tulip tree LA that they just replaced in the past few years. So now they have new tulip trees. They call it the mother tree. That mother tree is still alive, but it's starting to decline, and they think that tree is over 200 years old. So trees that are well taken care of, well maintained, and that are not in high-risk areas like along a coast. You know, you see trees, I've seen trees in Narragansett where they're just sheared from the winds because of the ocean, and they're growing like this, and you can see the wind is coming from here. Trees, I've been in Cumberland, Rhode Island, where we went to see your friends. Those trees, oak trees, maple, very, very tall because they're protected by hills. So that's trees in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, in between the valleys. There are those conifers, very, very tall, because they don't have lightning and they don't have very high winds. Or at least they didn't used to have high winds. So it's the weather, the elements that will take trees down quicker. But a protected area, they could grow. There's trees, I think in the desert, that they estimate that may be 800, 900 years old. Pine trees.
I have a question. Given we're a coastal town, a lot of times you'll see environments where they'll try to reinforce berms and things with soil, or not so much soil, but plantings. Is that going to save a tree if there is erosion going on? Eventually, is it going to get the tree, I guess?
So underneath the tree, there's shrubs or perennials or...
Yeah, or some type of
seagrass. That won't harm the tree as long as it's a tree that's deep-rooted. So oak trees are naturally deep-rooted. So that's why under oak trees, you could plant rhododendrons, azaleas. It's a good community of trees. And this is something you may want to think about is a plant community. So what smaller plants would grow well with lindens? Lindens are deep-rooted. You could plant some perennials, small shrubs that won't compete but are Like ilex, the native holly might look nice under linden. The native azaleas. But azaleas have to be careful because some of them like more moist soil. Yes.
Let me ask you a more basic question, something which has always puzzled me. Rhode Island has got a beautiful tree, which is a red maple.
Right.
Why are not more trees red? Why are they green? What's the advantage of being green versus being red?
A lot of trees, first of all, trees, the green color is chlorophyll in the trees. In the fall, the chemical or the compound that gives trees the green color is chlorophyll. Okay, it's like our hemoglobin. Okay. So in the fall, you see that the chlorophyll breaks down and it exposes other colors that are left in the leaves, like yellows, reds, oranges. So not all trees have those colors. Maples are a tree that we plant because of the beautiful fall colors. So they have evolved that way. And maples do very well along ponds, along water. And those that have more water tend to be brighter in the fall because they have enough moisture during the growing season.
The red maple
Right.
is the red year-round.
Oh, okay, that's a different cultivar. Right, that's...
Yeah, but you see, from an environmental point of view, sort of long term,
Right.
why did nature prefer green versus a perfectly good red maple color?
That red maple, though, is something that's been selected for. That wasn't... those cultivars of maple, it's the red leaf maple. That's something that was selected for and propagated. So you see that more widely available now in the nursery industry.
Yeah, but the thing is, people didn't make the red maple tree. The red maple tree existed, and they are now uncultivable.
Right.
There must have been some natural advantage to this particular tree to be red and not be green.
Right.
It just puzzles me.
That's, the reason is, it's just like us, there's mutations. When trees produce seed, that's it's a sexual reproduction. Nature makes mistakes in that process, just like it does in animals when people have birth defects. But there's also good mutations. There's bad mutations and good mutations. And when there's a good mutation like that suddenly a tree has red leaves and it's staying red, it takes the human or a good eye to see that this is different and propagate it. Or it's able to propagate on its own and continue. But this is genetic variation. We can't help it. It just happens.
I understand your reasoning, but it just puzzles me. Why in the first place has this come up? There must have been some natural advantage at some point in time for these red trees to...
It could have been there was some pressure, external pressure on the tree at that time where induced this mutation, this change in its genetic makeup. And suddenly it's a green tree is no longer producing green seedlings, green leaf seedlings, but it produced one red seedling. This is sexual reproduction. Nature makes mistakes. Most of them are bad, but sometimes there's good mistakes. And I hope that answers your question. I don't have the specific answer why there aren't more red, but there are. It's just that we're not looking.
When I fly over the Amazon basin,
Okay.
it's all green.
Right?
You don't see a single red tree like you see the red maple here in Rhode Island.
Right. But the red maple you don't see in the wild, do you? I don't.
I don't know.
No.
I don't know where it comes from.
No, it's a cultivar, which means it's a cultivated variety. It's something that humans cultivate. So it's not in the wild. I've never seen a red maple in the wild. And not that I've been all over the world, but...
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I have another question. So, given this wide variety of trees that we discussed tonight, I'm assuming there's a like a whole nursery industry that, you know, if you need your stunt bartlett pear,
Right.
you know, you could buy that at Home Depot. But is that industry diverse enough where kind of these specialty trees and some of the more hardy
Yeah.
trees that you're talking about?
Yeah, there are. It's Rhode Island Nurseries. Nursery is, I think the proper name is Rhode Island Nursery Association. They have a large number of, the nurseries in Rhode Island all belong to that, and you could look on their website to get a list of, see what nurseries are available. I know you're working with one nursery person now, a nurseryman, yeah. So there are nurseries that specialize in certain plants. They may specialize in conifers, they may specialize in shade trees. And there's retail nurseries and there's wholesale nurseries. So it's probably best to go to find a wholesale nursery. Friends with, it's Morning Star Nursery. He's on 138, Noah Conway. And he was telling me that a lot of their material is coming from the Mid-Atlantic region because they can produce it faster. They grow it small, they ship it up to him, and he grows them out for a year and sells them. Okay. Well, thank you. Lots of questions. I'm glad. If you have more questions, come on up and happy to answer or try to. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.